Thank you very much, Kavita ji, and thank you very much. Speaking after Lubna ji and all the great artists, they pretty much have covered a lot of the ideas that I think we all share in South Asia as far as art and artists and resistance and asking questions are about. You can hear me, right? I'm just checking. You can hear me, right? Okay. So I just want to move maybe the location a bit, and I think Lubna ji's slide hinted about it. We're constantly only talking about the state versus people, and I just want to shift that a bit here, because resistance, when we only focus on this relationship as the context for artistic resistance, I think we also fall into a trap set by the nationalistic narrative for you to only ask that question, because the nationalistic narrative actually picks holes on every ugliness that exists in society, uses that to further that narrative. And as long as we're only talking about that monstrosity that is obvious in front of our faces, I think we miss the other operations. So I just want to shift the focus a bit, because protest art also can be problematic. I know, I want to put that out also. I mean, Indian nationalism created a lot of great songs, a lot of great art. But that kind of art was also at times problematic. So it's not always true that protest art or protest questioning provides art that we would call democratic, that nurtures equality and nurtures empathy. That is not necessary. It can, that protest, because of a consolidation against within a court, a common enemy, allows for a momentary feeling of asking the right questions. But it doesn't necessarily ask the right questions. If you look at the songs that came out during the Swadeshi movement in India, they are problematic. Their contexts are problematic. But at that point, the evil was the British. And it was convenient for everybody's share in that moment of protest. So I think there needs to be some more nuance in even fighting the state. And I think for that, we have to step back and look at all the other uglinesses that happen within society, whether it's caste, whether it's gender, whether it is ethnic othering. In India, for example, that whole term of the Northeast states, that term itself is an othering term. So I think artists' involvement in every one of these spheres of social divisions, these spheres of intrinsic habits of criminal activity in many cases, is very, very important. And that sometimes is much harder for an artist to do. Unfortunately, unlike some of my previous speakers, I don't feel so excited about the number of artists who participate in asking difficult questions. I think they are far less than there should be. I think there are far less artists asking difficult questions, political or social or cultural. There are very few. It's the same names that we keep seeing again and again. And if you look at who actually asks the difficult questions in India, or probably the other parts of the continent, I don't know much, I'm presuming, it's people who are on the margins, whether it is a minority in genders, minority in caste, minority in religious practice. It is they who have asked very difficult questions of social structures, of political structures, because to a large extent, it is their conditionality that has made it very difficult for them to remain silent. It's the people who are practicing the arts of privilege, the middle class and the upper class. They are the ones who have largely remained silent, aiding and abetting every form of violence in society. And that seems to continue today as we face probably one of the biggest challenges to our constitution and to our morality in India. And it has not changed. And I think the reason it's not changed is because social questions have not been asked by even these artists who protest against, say, the present regime. They have not asked questions about ourselves. I have not asked questions about myself. I have not asked questions through my art about my own location, my own gender, my own caste, my own blind spots. So this reflectiveness of asking difficult questions through music, dance, or poetry, or theater, or painting needs to be further cultivated within also the people who are used to not asking questions, or who are in a situation of convenience. So I think that is very important. There's another point here. We can't reduce art to just protest art. We can't constantly tag it with protest art. What happens to traditional art forms? They may not ask the questions that we want to ask in our modern language, in our modern sensibility, in our modern democratic vocabulary. What happens to that? How do they participate? I think this is also a very important point, because we tend to think of protest art in, if I may use within quotes, an activistic quality. We look for this activistic quality. What happens? What does somebody do if they're just doing a dance form and doing a traditional piece within quotes, whatever that means? Does that have a participation in the complex questions we are discussing today? If so, how? That also needs to be negotiated. And we as people of democracy need to find a language to have that conversation. We may find the situation of that art difficult. We may find the practices difficult. We may find it very complicated. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is that conversation we can have with those traditional art forms? Which those art forms where we may have great differences of opinion with the way it's practiced or the way it's situated. So I think there is sometimes wonderful things that happen if you just shift the space of an art form happening. If an art form that is of all privilege just moves from its location, it's the same art form. You don't do anything. You're not creating new poetry. You're not asking questions of the government. You're not asking anything. But say that just the situation of that performance is shifted. Does the conversation change? And sometimes it does. Just moving location, because the participants then receive differently. It's the same story, but the story being told and received is different. So I think that is also something we should seriously think about, because otherwise we are also practicing a form of othering. In our want and very rightful want of furthering a very democratic conversation, there is a certain undemocratic nature when we don't have these complicated conversations with people of tradition. And I'm saying this because I think all South Asia shares in that idea of tradition. And sometimes we don't know what we are doing. We don't know how to have that conversation. We're very uncomfortable. And we're also uncomfortable because sometimes we also enjoy that. And we find conflict in ourselves. I mean, how do I reconcile that conflict? That a practice of a form which is ugly in social practice still gives me immense emotional pleasure. How do I reconcile that conflict? That is also a space we need to go into. I'll conclude by saying that I think a lot of these questions that we are asking of the state have to parallelly be asked. And I'm thinking of the long term and not the immediacy of the situation that we're all facing. Has to be asked of our various circles, of our various social structures in a constant dialogue. For example, as a singer, how do I problematize my own practice? How do I problematize me singing? How do I find myself an ugly artist? How do I recognize that ugliness as I sing? That's, I think, the most difficult question to ask. And I think that's the question that I would like to keep asking, because from there, I think we can change content, we can change participants, we can change the context, and we can also create bridges that bring conversation between art forms, which intrinsically means people that occupy very different spaces in our society. And once we create those bridges, then we have a far more vibrant and, shall I say, a far more incisive conversation we can have with that monolithic structure that we call the state. Thank you very much.